a fourth day of rallies and protests on the streets of Los Angeles. The situation calm at this hour after a weekend that saw repeated clashes between protesters and police. Multiple cars were burned, dozens were arrested. The LAPD says that some officers were targeted with a Molotov cocktail and others were rammed by a motorbike. As we watch protesters face off against police, another tense standoff unfolding between President Trump and California Governor Gavin Newsom. Over the weekend, Newsom dared Trump border czar Tom Homan to arrest him after Homan suggested that California's Democratic leaders could face federal charges if they interfere with immigration raids. And now, President Trump making it clear just how he thinks Homan should respond.
Gavin Newsom he's daring Tom Homan to come and arrest him. Should he do it?
I would do it if I were Tom. I think it's great. Gavin likes the publicity, but I think it would be a great thing.
I think it would be a great thing. Governor Newsom very quickly responded to those comments from the president. He wrote this, quote, "This is a day I hoped I would never see in America. I don't care if you're a Democrat or a Republican. This is a line we cannot cross as a nation. This is an unmistakable step toward authoritarianism." This afternoon, California announced that they're suing the federal government after President Trump authorized the deployment of those thousands of National Guard troops to the streets of LA without the governor's consent. The Trump administration claiming the troops are necessary and contradicting state officials who say that they have the resources they need.
What you're seeing is we're behind the LA
team coverage. Our panel is going to weigh in just a few moments. We're going to start with CNN's Kristen Holmes outside the White House, CNN's Jason Carroll in LA, and CNN's Natasha Bertrand, who's standing by at the Pentagon with some new reporting. Jason, I do want to get to you first because this was the official appointed hour for the beginning of some of these protests for today. What are you seeing and hearing on the ground right now?
Well, the protests have gotten underway. We're right here, if I can set the scene for you, at Grand Park. It's just in the shadow of City Hall in downtown Los Angeles. There were several hundred people here, or even more than that, Casey, who have gathered here, all in part to pay tribute to David Huerta, the president of the SEIU, the Services Employee International Union. This is a man who was taken into custody just a few blocks from where we are now in the Garment District on Friday. The union says, Casey, that he was out here trying to protect the rights of migrants who were being taken into custody during an ICE raid. Of course, the federal government saying that this is not what happened. They're saying that what Huerta did was obstruct their efforts to take into custody people who are here illegally. And so what we've seen is a number of people here who are gathering. They're saying by taking him into custody, that is making a tense situation even worse. And of course, law enforcement does not want to see a repeat of what they saw over the weekend. You had some dozen people who were arrested after protesters clashed with police, shut down part of the 101 freeway at one point. They were throwing cement blocks at police, setting off fireworks in their direction. So they don't want to see a repeat of that. And those who I talked to out here today, Casey, say they don't want to see that either. They're hoping their message of peace does not get lost through all of the violence.
For sure. All right, Kristen, let me go to you. I want to talk to you about what we've heard from the president today and what we expect to hear next.
Comes to the rhetoric, it seems like a lot of personal attacks. At one point, he said that Governor Newsom was a nice guy, but he was totally incompetent. Then he pushed back on Newsom's claims that Trump wanted a civil war, saying it was Newsom that wanted a civil war, that if he wanted a civil war, he wouldn't have deployed the National Guard. And then after those comments about arresting Newsom, saying that if he was his own border czar, Tom Homan, he would arrest Newsom, he pushed back to a reporter asking, well, what would his crime be? This is obviously not a crime, what he said, but instead he said his primary crime was ever running for governor in the first place. So clearly here, this is getting incredibly personal. These are personal jabs. But we also know that there is a lot of emphasis on what's going on, and there are a lot of power behind both of these people. Now, he was asked specifically a question about his past rhetoric when it came to deploying the National Guard, and in particular, how he said in the past that it should be up to the governors. Take a listen.
2020, when you were talking about unrest in American cities, you said, quote, "We have to go by the laws. We can't call in the National Guard unless we're requested by a governor." What changed now? Why is this situation different to not consult with Governor Newsom about this?
Well, the biggest change from that statement is we have an incompetent governor. So I talked about governors, but I didn't talk about he's an incompetent governor. Look at the job he's doing in California. He's destroying one of our great states. And if I didn't get involved, if we didn't bring the Guard in, and we would bring more in if we needed it, because we have to make sure there's going to be law and order.
And of course, all of this is stemming from the fact that this is the first time in 60 years that a president has called in the National Guard without the request of the governor. It doesn't seem like this is ending anytime soon. And when he was asked about a potential lawsuit, he pushed back on that too, saying, well, this is what we had to do. So he is doubling, tripling down on this bringing in the reinforcements without having the support of the state's governor.
So speaking of reinforcements, Natasha, you have some new reporting on U.S. Marines now being mobilized to L.A. What have you learned?
Yeah, Casey, this is something that Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth previewed over the weekend. He said that he would be willing to deploy Marines to Los Angeles to help with the crowd control and help deal with the protests there, in addition to the National Guard's troops that were mobilized by President Donald Trump. And it now appears, according to our sources, that those Marines who are based in California, they have been mobilized and they are preparing to head to Los Angeles to help with these protests. Now, it's unclear at this point exactly what their task is going to be. We're told that Defense Department lawyers are still kind of working out the rules of engagement for them and the kind of left and right of what they can actually do once they're there. But we're told that it is largely expected to mirror the kind of standing orders that the National Guard has, which is they can protect federal personnel. If they are threatened, they are going to be protecting property, but ultimately they cannot be engaged in law enforcement type activities like making arrests, for example, unless President Trump invokes the Insurrection Act, which would allow those troops, those National Guard troops, as well as the Marines to start acting in a law enforcement capacity. So this is obviously a significant escalation in President Trump's use of the military on U.S. domestic soil as a show of force against these protesters. But ultimately, it is not entirely clear how different their role is going to be, if at all, from those National Guard troops who are already working inside Los Angeles alongside federal personnel to try to get these protests under control, Casey.
This is the first time in 60 years that a president has deployed the National Guard against the wishes of a governor. When it happened then, it was President Lyndon Johnson who was protecting civil rights activists in Alabama. Let's listen to how President Trump talked about these protesters today.
The people that are causing the problem are professional agitators, they're insurrectionists, they're bad people, they should be in jail.
Specifically, the president's choice of the word insurrectionists, likely no accident. Over the weekend, Trump refused to rule out invoking the Insurrection Act. That act allows him to deploy active duty military troops on the streets of America's cities and towns to conduct law enforcement. This does seem to be a fight that Donald Trump wants. He, of course, views law enforcement, crime, immigration issues as winning issues for him and the Republican Party. And the protests in California have allowed him to target a blue city in a blue state. And of course, the state's Democratic governor likely to run for president in 2028. The question is, of course, just how far will the president go? Let's look at how Gavin Newsom seems to be answering that question right now.
This is serious. The people's lives are at stake. The reputation of this country is at stake. Great American cities and states. It's not just, this is a preview for things to come. This isn't about LA per se. It's about us today. It's about you, everyone watching tomorrow. I promise you. I mean, this guy's unhinged. Donald Trump is unhinged right now.